I don't know if I've ever told you guys this, but when it comes to my ethnicity, I am nearly full-blooded Portuguese. And growing up in a family that's all Portuguese themselves, some of them being immigrants from Portugal, I started realizing at a really young age that some of the cultural norms that are based off of Portuguese culture was starting to be sprinkled into my life. And it's all the more apparent as I was growing up because the part of the United States where I'm from, Massachusetts, as I'm born in the United States, there is a strong Portuguese population at this area I'm in. So it became more and more apparent as I was growing up. And from what I noticed with Portugal's culture, and its history, is there's never been really anything that extreme about it. If anything, it's more comforting when I think about it, because what comes to mind when I think of Portugal, the country that's the home of my ethnicity, I think of its cuisine. I think of stuff like shrimp Mozambique. I think of malasadas, a really tasty fried dough pastry. I think of all the different wines that have come from Portugal. I think of all of its fishing ports and the cuisine of seafood that come from Portugal. Obviously, I think of Cristiano Ronaldo because he's basically at this point like a superhero when it comes to anything that has to do with football, the real football. As for its history and its historical types of individuals, one that comes to mind because of all of the explorers that came from Portugal obviously would be Vasco da Gama. So I always think of stuff like that. It's comforting, or some historical facts, and that's really it. The last thing I think of when I think of Portugal is, double homicide and death metal. That is until recently when I discovered this story. This video all being about the Portuguese death metal band Agonizing Terror. Once again, massive thank you and credits go to Cookie Wojo Nick, who told me about this in a previous comment a handful of weeks ago. For those who are unaware, Agonizing Terror was a 4-piece death metal band that formed back in 1994 from Ilhavo Aveiro, Portugal. Also, just a quick side note, since I started this video off stating that I'm nearly full-blooded Portuguese, if at any point I am mispronouncing any of the Portuguese language in this video, by all means rip me apart in the comments, because I should honestly know better at this point in my life how to speak some Portuguese. Anyways, getting back on track here. Originally, Agonizing Terror formed in 1993, but under a different name, that being Pain Possessed. A year later, in 1994, they would change it a second time to Obnoxious Odium. And then later on in that year, in 1994, they would change it a third time to what we know as it today, Agonizing Terror. Now, while it's often characterized within the lifespan of Agonizing Terror that it was a 4-piece, for the sake of this video, there's 2 people in particular I'm going to focus on, that being Antonio Jorge Matos, otherwise known as his stage name being Tojo, as he was the guitarist for this band and later on became doing double duty as the guitarist and vocalist, and his girlfriend, who then later on became his wife, Sara Matos, as she was the drummer, then later on became doing double duty performing both the drums and vocals. From the handful of articles that I came across discussing the upbringing of Tojo and the events that would follow after, is that all of them are pretty consistent with his upbringing, that he went to Ilhavo High School, he got good grades, he was pretty reclusive and wasn't that social, but never had any hostility towards anything, and for the most part he was in a somewhat more upper class family, as his father was a doctor in the Ilhavo Medical Center and his mother was a housewife. However, Tojo had a big fascination for metal music and some darker aspects of life, as he was starting to wear obviously dark clothing, starting to grow out his hair, the cliches of finding fascination with metal, around the same time as when he was about to form Agonizing Terror with his then girlfriend, but later on wife, Sarah. And during that time in like 93, 94, the early to mid 90s, although it didn't explode, Portugal was getting somewhat of a metal scene going. A few bands that come to mind that were from Portugal making waves during this time, of course, would be Moonspell, as they're like the biggest metal band based out of Portugal. I think during the early and mid 90s they were doing more like black metal releases, even though they've transitioned now to more of a gothic metal approach. Then you have Sacred Sin, which from my understanding, they are the first death metal band based out of Portugal, and even got some of their music to be played on MTV, which was quite a big deal. And the third inclusion is a little bit more obscure, but they're a personal favorite of mine, would be this band called Sirius, who formed in 1994. That if you want some excellent symphonic black metal, check these guys out. So while the Portuguese metal scene has never been anything massive, especially during the mid and early 90s, I do feel like for the little spark it started with, it clearly got Tojo inspired and influenced with it, along with the fact that his girlfriend Sarah is a drummer. It made him embellish death metal all the more, hence why they would start Agonizing Terror. A year after they formed in 1995, they would release their debut demo, Disharmony in God's Creation. This demo contains half a dozen tracks, and it clocks in a little under 14 minutes long. And if you subtract the intro song on here, that's just all keyboards, roughly what you're getting is 12 and a half minutes of metal material, played in the style of death metal with some attributes of grindcore bleeding through to get into that death grind fusion. To be upfront with you guys, of the two demos that they would release, I would state that I vastly prefer the follow-up demo to this one, which I'll be talking about later on in this video. Because when it comes to Disharmony in God's Creation, it's just a really short, bone-dry cut death metal demo, death grind demo from the 90s. As you guys know, during that time, there was just a plethora of demos in the style of death metal being released on a regular basis. So this isn't really anything out of the ordinary per se, but it does have its moments that can be quite enjoyable, especially if you're a death metal connoisseur looking for more obscure names. Two particular songs on here that stood out to me would be Enemies of God and the closing track, Massacre, as there's the rare occurrence what you're going to hear on here are riffs that are pretty rhythmic and they have a lot of groove to it, and you can find yourself head bopping to it as I did. As for the vocals, it's really just straightforward meat and potatoes types of death metal growls. I mean, it's nothing weak, but it's nothing really that distinct. It's really just doing its job for a death metal demo, and that's really it. By the way, it's also worth mentioning that during this time, Tojo wasn't doing vocals for the band. This individual was for just this demo, and then he left. I guess my real criticism here with this demo that I really can't be that harsh about, because again, it's a death metal demo out of all things, is the composition and overall performance of the drums especially are quite sloppy, and they find themselves not linking together all the time. But to others, again, if you enjoy death metal demos and these obscure DIY hidden names, you might find appreciation for it again for that DIY approach, and having somewhat of like this savage-like effect with how all the instrumentations kind of like fall on top of each other. So, you know, you might enjoy it for that distinct charm. 2 years later, in 1997, they would release their second and final demo, Ways of Existence. Even though this is labeled as a demo, I would debatably call this a full length, because it contains 5 tracks and the overall runtime is 29.5 minutes long. Add to the fact the overall performance and production value on this is superior to the previous demo. There are some noticeable differences between this release and the previous demo, as in the debut release it was more in the style of death grind, whereas Ways of Existence, this is in the style now of melodic death metal, as the melody songwriting approach on this release has been tenfolded. Other noticeable differences is the song durations, as on the previous demo it was roughly around 2 to 2.5 minutes long, where on this demo songs range roughly around 7 minutes and up. Add to the fact the lineup has been shaken up, as now Tojo went from just doing lead guitars on the previous demo to whereas Ways of Existence, he's doing rhythm guitar and performing vocals on here. His wife Sarah is still performing drums, but she as well does vocals, but more clean singing in that sense. And the third member, Marco, does lead guitar and backing vocals. Even though the band is still Agonizing Terror by name, with all the different change-ups when it comes to the lineup, their overall performance and execution on here, it definitely sounds like a different band when you compare it from the previous demo. And because of their different approach, I really do feel like their ambitions were tenfolded on this release. For example, with the songwriting, again, more in the vein of melodic death metal, and these songs being longer, going from 2 minutes to roughly 7 minutes up, you're noticing now the compositions have a little bit more dynamics to it. Instead of it just being, fast at the beginning and then it ends abruptly fast, we're having some build up, we're having some falling action, we're having some guitar solos to just shake it up. So again, while it's nothing groundbreaking, I just feel like the execution, the ambition, and overall songwriting has dramatically improved. Tojo's vocal performance is a lot more raw and emotive compared to the previous vocalist that they had. That again, even though it's still basically this one pitch type of death metal growl, just the overall execution, how it blends with all of the guitar riffs, you can really feel the melodies hit a little bit harder. Even the drumming by Sarah on here is nowhere as sloppy as it was on the demo. It's a lot tighter, and she doesn't rely on just blast beats from start to finish on these tracks. Again, as I stated, the composition has just dramatically improved because there's more dynamics to it. That when it comes to the overall guitar riffs of it being in that melodic death metal type of realm, it doesn't feel like it's ripping off any of the Gothenburg types of bands that a lot of people were doing during this time. If anything, it reminds me of stuff that you would hear from either Nightingales or Gates of Istar, that it's melodic death metal, but there's some grit to it. As for the closing track on here, Eternally Condemned, it's really the only blemish I need to bring up, as it's the only part of the release where we're hearing Sarah doing her clean singing, and it's either Marco or Tojo doing clean singing as well. And all I can say is A for effort when it comes to how it's written in the song, because when it comes to the performance and execution, not really the best. And I mean this as politely as possible. And I don't want to sound like this, stereotypical metal fan that's all growls all the time, that's it. I don't mind clean singing in extreme metal, but it's not really that good. But what I admire about it regardless is it showcases all the ambition that they clearly had, because it's a massive transition and step up from the previous demo, and I can only imagine what they could have done if they continued on. From the years that followed, from 1998 to 1999, Agonizing Terror would remain active performing live shows, some of which have been archived that you can watch here on YouTube, link provided in the description to some of them. And according to an article by Cult Nation, Agonizing Terror would be able to perform as an opener for Moonspell, showcasing that they had somewhat of a promising future going as a death metal band. That is until we reach August 1999, where everything would come crashing down. From all the articles and reports I read discussing the relationship between Sarah and Tojo, is that during this point in the late 90s, they have been married and they're living on Sarah's parents' property, or in their house in this case. And whenever they did rehearsals for Agonizing Terror, they would rehearse in the chicken coop that's on their parents' property as well. Now, as one can imagine, when it comes to their income and finances, being in a death metal band is really difficult to have a net positive with sales and, expenses. So I can really only imagine that they weren't making that much off of Agonizing Terror. But Tojo was working as an accountant, and Sarah, her career has never been listed, so there's some mysterious information about her and it's quite limited. But it's also worth mentioning that Tojo's father, again being a doctor, would send them a monthly allowance as well. So just going through all of this, it seems like when it comes to Tojo and Sarah with how they were living, they were kind of just having somewhat of the easy life, really just, living off of their parents' wealth. But where this story starts to take a dark and twisted turn is when we look at the personalities of both Tojo and Sarah being quite different. As I stated earlier, Tojo is a bit more reclusive, keeping to himself, and really opening up personally to Sarah, as that was his wife. Really, when it came to anything that he wanted to showcase expression, it would be through his art and music, as he would write all the lyrics for Agonizing Terror. having themes to do with religion or these dark and gloomy aspects about life, and having somewhat of these social political criticisms with some of the songs when you look at some of the lyrics. Whereas Sarah is a bit more mysterious, not only with just her information, but how she kind of interacts with Tojo. A lot of these reports I was coming across when it came to future events, which I'll discuss later on, and how she interacted with Tojo, was she was a lot more manipulative. She would really try to persuade Tojo to do certain things, or really try to act like she's in charge of his own actions. Thus, it seemed like Tojo wanted to keep to himself, but would really try to, you know, sympathize more with what Sarah wanted. Thus, we have this kind of like weird uneven balance in terms of like really who's in charge of the relationship, as Sarah was kind of undermining what Tojo would do. And that would come into full effect on the night of August 11th, 1999. From what I was able to gather from multiple articles is that Sarah always tried to convince Tojo to do her bidding, and one of that was to murder his own parents and cash in on the life insurance policy of his dad, since he was a doctor, and even sell the house that they were living in that was under construction but had a lot of retail value to it. From what I was able to gather, it seemed as if Sarah would try to persuade Tojo to do this for weeks and even months on end. But what I guess was the breaking point that caused Tojo to think this was a good idea is that during this time period in August of 1999, Tojo's father and mother were coming back from vacation, and Tojo and his wife were going to go on vacation. So between these two different breaking points of when they would leave and come back from the two parties, it seemed as if it would be a good alibi for them to commit such murder and then get away with it. So on the night of August 11th, Tojo went to his parents' house and waited until roughly around a little bit before midnight to go into the house, as I believe the front door or the side door was open, as again it was under construction, and proceed to murder his parents. One article that I read that had an interview portion of Tojo explaining his murder step by step is that he had a knife, and he went to his dad and his mother and handed them a letter. It was written by Sarah. The letter really didn't have any meaning other than for both of his parents to read it, as Tojo would come up from behind and strike. Not gonna lie to you guys, reading this portion and describing it here is pretty upsetting to like read word by word and describe it to you guys from what I read. But he stabbed his dad first, and apparently he stabbed him 33 times. And he also stated in the interview that when he was stabbing his father, his mother did not attack, she didn't get defensive, she didn't call police, she was just absolutely confused, and his father didn't even fight back at first. I don't know if it was because of pure shock from being attacked or seeing his own son attack him, but it wasn't really that difficult to commit murder to his father, because his dad didn't even put up a fight because he was just in pure utter shock. And again, he stabbed him 33 times in the neck apparently, so much so that he almost decapitated his own father by doing that. As for his mother, she fled the house to the front gate of the property. Tojo chased her down, and reportedly he stabbed her over a dozen times. From there, he brought the bodies back into the house and had a gas leak, trying to set the house on fire to seem like as if it was an accident, but that didn't come into fruition, and from there, he fled the scene. There was one eyewitness report that I came across of a Portuguese article that interviewed the neighborhood, I think 15 years or so after this crime occurred. And one eyewitness report stated that he saw Tojo get in his car, but there was another person in it already, heavily speculating that that might have been Sarah in the getaway car apparently, but there was no concrete proof and they couldn't take that into court. The one notion that kept popping up over and over again, whether the articles and reports were written in English or Portuguese, is that it always stated that during that night of August 11th into August 12th, it was the last eclipse of the millennia, and this is where they start connecting it as it was some kind of like satanic ritual crime. There was only more fuel added to the fire of this story by the media when police finally interrogated Tojo and his wife, as they realized that he had some religious texts in his pocket when they were interrogating him, which all had to do with their band Agonizing Terror, them connecting him to a death metal band and extreme metal as a whole when it came to their lyrical themes. The media truly portrayed this overall crime as it was a satanic ritual, which I started to notice really quickly that the Portuguese media almost sensationalized this, that during this time of the year of 1999 up into the year of 2001 of all the court hearings, it was a big deal in Portugal. They treated it like it was this satanic ritual murder happening, which that wasn't the case. And it's just sad that they sensationalized it as such for, I guess, more attention or something. I guess that's how media kind of works with news reports. But some of the news reports that have been archived here on YouTube that I've watched, again, link provided in the description to them, and shout out to the subtitles, is that the word Satanism was thrown around a lot. And it eerily mirrors how the media portrayed, you know, what happened in Norway a few years earlier with the church burnings and mayhem, Burzum, and all that stuff, to how Italy portrayed the beasts of Satan with all the murders that happened in their country. Regardless, when it came to all of the court hearings, how Tojo would describe it is always like as if he was under the spell of Sarah and his wife, that he was doing her bidding because this is what she wanted. Whereas when it came to Sarah, with all the way she kind of portrayed herself and was at the courts, she stayed very stone cold silent. She was almost emotionless to everything that was happening. And it seemed as if she was just upset that she didn't get away with it, or that Tojo kind of let her down because he didn't follow the exact plan that she wanted. Not that I'm trying to turn this story into some dark, twisted comedy, but it just gets all the more ridiculous of how the media and courts was handling the situation of death metal and extreme metal being somewhat connected to all of this. Because from what I was able to gather from the Cult Nation report based off the court hearings that were going on between the years of 1999 to 2001, is that they would start interviewing or doing hearings with other, you know, extreme metal musicians around the area. One of which being a friend of Tojo, that being Nuno Lima, who he's a part of a black metal band during this time called Summon Malum, which again, he just plays pretty straightforward, stripped down black metal, nothing to say here. But during these court hearings, he had to explain what black metal is all about, as it's really more of a gimmick, and that when he was pushed against the wall to really explain what black metal is, started toning down his look, cutting his hair, and being more approachable to the courts to make it seem as if black metal wasn't as threatening as they were trying to perceive it as, again, for a gimmick. Nevertheless, when it came to Tojo and his crimes, it was undeniable to both the court, the judge, and the jury that he was found guilty. And he was sentenced to a maximum prison sentence of 25 years in Portugal. As for his wife, Sarah, she got away scot-free. Nothing. No penalty, no slap on the wrist, absolutely nothing. She was found innocent. Even with that eyewitness report I brought up earlier, as supposedly she was in the getaway car and she could have been an accessory to murder, the eyewitness report never came through and they had no concrete evidence. So Sarah, even though at most what we got from Tojo was he was influenced by her words to commit murder, that was not sustainable in court, and as I stated, she got away absolutely 100% scot-free. Before I go any further with this story, I just want to give my own personal 2 cents about the outcome here. Because I've noticed for some comments from articles and videos discussing this, is that a lot of people state Sarah is just as evil, she's to blame as well, she's manipulative, she's evil, she's ice cold, and this all wouldn't have happened if she didn't get involved and convince Tojo to do this. I'll just state right here, straight up, Tojo absolutely is the worst out of everyone here. Regardless of what he heard, what his mindset was, regardless if it was a full moon, an eclipse, if it was all about death metal, if it was to do with Satanism or not, end of the day, that man physically murdered his parents. And that is absolutely despicable in any which way possible, regardless if he was young and dumb or he meticulously thought it out. Like, that is absolutely, he is the worst and absolutely to blame here, no matter what Sarah could have possibly said and put in his mind. However, I do believe Sarah is guilty on a more of an emotional and financial thing here, because again, it connects to how they wanted to cash in on their parents' life insurance policy and try to own the house and sell it and make money. It does absolutely seem like she undermined Tojo to get to that kind of financial stability or like gain, but she didn't physically do anything. Alright, it's like, regardless of influence, she didn't actually, like, stab them. The one thing I do believe she is guilty for, because she's still a part of it with influence, is that eyewitness report that supposedly she was in the getaway car as an accessory to murder. I do believe, to some degree, they should have, like, prosecuted her a little bit harder to get to that, but nothing came of it. And again, this event was over 26 years ago, so it's too little too late. But I just want to state here that, yeah, Tojo absolutely is to blame here, 1000%. But in a more of an emotional and just, visual narrative standpoint here, I think in some sense, Sarah is absolutely guilty to some degree. Anyway, getting back on track. When Tojo was sentenced to prison, he was visited by Sarah only one single time. And he promised her that he still wanted to be with her and see it through to the bitter end, only for Sarah to basically ditch him and end the relationship within the first visit. And supposedly, from one of the articles I read, is that after breaking it off with Tojo, Sarah immediately started a relationship with one of the prison guards from the prison that Tojo was incarcerated in, which is like really messed up. However, Tojo ended up being released from prison in February of 2016 for good behavior. I believe he served either 17 years as he was incarcerated in 1999 or 15 years as the courts ended in 2001. Regardless, for being sentenced to double homicide of your parents for 25 years, he only served 2/3 of that. The last bit of information that I can give you about Tojo is apparently after being released from prison in 2016, he plans on starting a career in finances and accounting, living at his aunt's house. It's just with his reputation in shambles after the events that happened a decade and a half prior to him being released from prison, it's widely speculated that his endeavors to start a new life have been quite difficult. As for the status of agonizing terror, as one can imagine, it immediately ended after the crime was committed on August 11th, 1999. The only other thing to report with it is that in 2015, a compilation was put out called Disharmony in Existence, as it's a compilation of their two previous demos onto one CD, and was put out by Firecom Records. The last bit of information that I can give you about agonizing terror and the events that relate to it is back in 2014, I guess this was the 15th anniversary of this event, there was a film put out called Eclipse in Portugal, which this whole film is heavily based off of the events and individuals that were part of agonizing terror, from the band, the relationship between Sarah and Tojo, to the murders that happened. From what I gather from the trailer, as that was the only thing I could come across, I couldn't find the film anywhere online, but it just kind of looks like this weird, dark comedy drama, low budget film that just looks like the Portuguese version of Lords of Chaos is what it just looks like from the trailer, from what I gathered. Again, I couldn't find anywhere to watch it online. From the reviews I see of it, it's kind of rated pretty low. I'm not really in a hurry to watch it, but yeah, there's really a film based off of Agonizing Terror, believe it or not. And that'll do it for this video, guys. So like always, I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If there's any other stories pertaining to extreme metal and wild, insane individuals, or events or crimes similar to this that you would like to see me cover in future videos, definitely let me know in the comments, and I'll try my best to credit you guys with upcoming videos. Other than that, like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.